The brass key was sitting on my nightstand the morning I changed my will. I hadn't used it in 34 years. You don't lock doors in your own home, or at least that's what I believed, until my son's golden retriever was sleeping in my bed while I was on a cot in my own study. But let me start where things actually began, because the key didn't mean anything until the very end, and endings only make sense when you've seen the whole road. My name is Norma Holloway. I am 71 years old. I practiced tax law for 38 years. I raised 2 children in a colonial house in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and I buried my husband Walter 5 years ago last November. I am 5'2", I weigh 114 pounds, and I once made a partner at Sullivan & Park cry in a deposition by asking him the same question 11 times in 11 different ways until he finally told the truth. I mention these things not as a boast, but as a context. I am not a woman who is easily moved from her position. I am not a woman who is managed. I thought, at 71, that this was something everyone around me understood. I was wrong. It turned out my son's wife had been studying me the way a geologist studies a cliff face, looking for the place where the rock is softer than it seems. The house on Aldermore Lane had been mine and Walter's since 1987. We bought it young and stupid and wildly optimistic, stretched our budget until it hurt, and spent the first decade fixing everything that was wrong with it ourselves. Walter rebuilt the back porch with his own hands the summer Brandon was 3 and Teresa was 5. The kids grew up in it. Brandon left for Yukon, then for Stanford. Teresa left for Vermont and a life that suited her, teaching high school biology, married to a quiet man named Greg, who built furniture in his spare time. 2 kids who called me on my birthday without being reminded. The house stayed mine and Walter's. Then just mine. I had my routines. Morning coffee at 6:15 at the kitchen table, facing east, watching the light change in the yard. An hour of reading before anything else required my attention. Lunch at 12:30, a walk at 2, dinner whenever I felt like it. Tuesday evenings the girls came over, Ruth from directly across the street, Diane from 12 minutes away, Pat from 15, and we cooked things that were theoretically ambitious and practically disastrous, and we drank wine and talked. This had been going on for 6 years. We called it the Tuesday Club, which sounded dignified, and most Tuesdays there was a significant gap between the ambition and the execution. The week before everything started, we had attempted boeuf bourguignon. Pat had somehow managed to set the bay leaves on fire. Ruth had declared that this was objectively not possible, and yet there the bay leaves were, burning. We ordered Vietnamese. We always ordered something. I was content. That is the word. Not wildly happy, not bursting with enthusiasm for the future, but genuinely, quietly content. Walter was gone, and I missed him the way you miss a limb, not constantly, not dramatically, but with a specific awareness that something that should be there isn't. The house helped. Every room had him in it. My study had his desk, a massive walnut partner's desk that he'd hauled back from an estate sale in 1994, complaining about his back the entire drive home, and then standing in front of it in the driveway with the expression of a man who has done something he will never regret. His books were on the shelves. His reading chair was in the corner. I worked at his desk. I slept in our bedroom. I was not ready to let any of that go. Brandon called on Sundays. He had done this since Walter died, which I found touching for about 6 months, and then merely regular. He was a good son in the way that people are good at things they were trained to do. Reliable, present on holidays, appropriately concerned without being intrusive. He was also, and I say this with the clarity of 35 years of observation, a man who had difficulty maintaining positions when someone pushed back. He had been this way since adolescence. Not a bad person, not a weak person in every way, but someone who, when a strong current moved through the room, tended to drift with it. His wife Krista was the current. I had nothing against Krista, strictly speaking. She was attractive in the polished, effortful way of women who treat their appearance as a project, which is a legitimate approach to life, even if it isn't mine. She ran a lifestyle blog. I'm told the correct word is platform, and I'm told there are 80,000 people who followed her descriptions of her home, her meals, her self-improvement routines, and most significantly, her dog. Garbo was a golden retriever, 3 years old, honey-colored and enthusiastic, with her own Instagram account and what Krista described as attachment anxiety. I am a person who likes dogs. I liked Garbo fine. This is important to establish because later, when people heard the story, they assumed I was the kind of woman who resented an animal. I wasn't. I resented what the animal was used for. The renovation was announced on a Sunday in early October. Brandon called as usual and explained that they were doing a full renovation of their Stamford apartment. Gut renovation, he said, which meant they'd been planning this for some time, and that it would take approximately 3 months. He said approximately, which I noted even then. He asked if they could stay with me. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. What I envisioned was the following: Brandon and Krista in the guest bedroom, Garbo on a dog bed in the living room or the guest room, all of us managing politely for 90 days. I was not thrilled. I valued my quiet, but I was not opposed. He was my son. These things happen. What I did not envision, and what I should perhaps have asked about in advance, was Krista's working arrangements. She filmed content. Filming content required, apparently, consistent and controlled backgrounds, specific lighting setups, and what she called an undisturbed creative environment. She had, without asking, decided that the kitchen would be her primary filming location. I came downstairs the second morning to find my kitchen rearranged, the toaster moved, the fruit bowl relocated, a ring light on a stand next to my stove, and Krista filming herself making oatmeal. I stood in the doorway for a moment, still in my bathrobe, holding my coffee mug, and watched her narrate the addition of blueberries to oatmeal with the conviction of a person communicating information of genuine importance. She saw me. She smiled. "'Smorning, Norma. Hope I'm not in your way. I just needed the morning light in here. It's perfect." The light in my kitchen had been perfect for 34 years before Krista Holloway discovered it, but I said nothing. I made my coffee at the rearranged counter and took it to the dining room. Garbo, I discovered on the third day, had taken the guest bedroom. Not voluntarily, Krista had set it up for her. There was a dog bed the size of a small sofa, a white noise machine, a humidifier, and blackout curtains that I had not bought and had not authorized. The curtains alone were not inexpensive. When I asked about this, Krista explained, with the same warm smile, that Garbo had separation anxiety and needed her own space to decompress. I asked where Krista and Brandon were sleeping. "The master bedroom," she said. My master bedroom. My bedroom. They had, with the ease of people who had never considered that this might require discussion, simply moved their things into my room. I want to be precise about my reaction in that moment. I did not explode. I am not an explosive person. What I felt was something more like the sensation you get when a calculation you've been running turns out to have an error. A quiet, cold recalibration. I told Krista that I used that bedroom. Krista said with a slight adjustment of expression, not the warm smile now, something more careful, that she'd thought I wouldn't mind, since there was the study, and the study had a comfortable couch. "It's just for a little while, Norma, and you have so much space in there. Walter's desk, all your books. I thought you might actually prefer it." less to take care of. The couch in my study was a love seat Walter and I had bought at a church sale in 2003. It was comfortable for reading. It was not comfortable for sleeping. I was 71 years old with a lower back that had been expressing opinions since I turned 65. I told Krista, in the voice I used to use for junior associates who had made consequential errors, that I would be sleeping in my bedroom that night. She nodded. She said, of course, I'll talk to Brandon." Brandon, when I talked to him that evening, had the expression of a man who had known a conversation was coming and had been hoping it would go differently. He said they hadn't meant to presume. He said Garbo really did have anxiety. He said the study seemed so cozy. I looked at my son across the kitchen table where he had done his homework, where he had told me about his first girlfriend, where we had sat the morning after Walter died and not said anything for an hour because there was nothing to say. And I saw clearly that he had not arrived at this arrangement by accident. Brandon, I am not sleeping on a love seat. Mom, it's just, Garbo gets really stressed when she's in a new place, and she needs... Garbo is a dog. She can adapt. Krista has a system with her. It's about content. She needs the setup consistent, and the bedroom has the right light for the morning pieces, and... Brandon. He stopped. Whose house is this? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the table. I'll ask Krista to move Garbo's things. He did ask. I know he asked because I could hear them talking through the wall that night. Krista's voice low and rapid, Brandon's voice in a register I recognized as the one he used when he was trying to hold a position against significant pressure. In the morning, Garbo was still in the guest room, Krista and Brandon were still in my room, and nothing had changed. On the counter, there was a note from Krista saying she'd ordered a memory foam topper for the love seat and hoped that would make things more comfortable. I took the note to my study, sat down at Walter's desk, and read it twice. Then I called Ruth. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant nothing unusual because Ruth kept hours that would shame a much younger person. I could see her kitchen window from my study window. The light was on. I wondered when you were going to call. I've seen the ring light in your kitchen for 3 days. What in the hell is going on over there? I told her. All of it. The kitchen rearrangement, the guest room setup, the bedroom situation, the note about the memory foam topper. Ruth listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Ruth. They put you on a love seat. A love seat, yes. Norma, your son's wife put a 71-year-old woman with back problems on a church sale love seat so her dog could have a bedroom. That appears to be the situation. That is genuinely, I've heard some shit in my life, Norma. 30 years on the force, I have heard some genuinely impressive shit. But a grown woman putting her mother-in-law on a love seat for a dog? What is the dog's name again? Garbo. Like Greta Garbo. Like Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo gets a bedroom, and Norma Holloway gets a love seat. This is Tuesday, Norma. We're doing Tuesday this week. Obviously. Tuesday came. I arrived at my own kitchen at 6:15 as usual, made my coffee, and found Krista already filming, a segment about mindful mornings. She was wearing a silk robe that looked expensive and moving through my kitchen with the proprietary ease of a person in their own space. I made my coffee without comment and went to the study. I had slept badly on the love seat, which had performed exactly as expected. My back was announcing its dissatisfaction with sustained specificity. The Tuesday Club met at 7 that evening. We were attempting Julia Child's Coq au vin, which Pat had proposed with great confidence and which Diane had greeted with what she later described as an open mind and a private premonition. By 8 o'clock, the premonition had been vindicated. Something had gone wrong with the wine-to-chicken ratio in a way none of us could precisely identify, and the whole thing smelled strongly of a French countryside and only faintly of anything you'd want to eat. We ordered Thai. We opened the second bottle. All right, someone tell me about the dog situation, because Ruth has been texting me all week, and I want the full story. Ruth looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been holding something in. Tell them about the memory foam topper. I told them. Diane listened with the careful attention of a doctor hearing symptoms. Pat's face went through several phases. By the end, she had refilled her glass twice. So let me understand. Your son asked if he could stay. You said yes. His wife rearranged your kitchen, gave the guest room to the dog, moved herself and your son into your bedroom, and left you a note about a mattress topper. That's accurate. That is absolutely spectacular. That woman has balls the size of... What do they say in Connecticut? Do you say that here? We understand the expression. How's your back? Expressing opinions. Diane leaned forward slightly. Norma, what do you want to do about this? That was always Diane's question. Not what had happened, not who was wrong, but what did you want to do? 30 years of pediatrics had given her a particular patience with situations that had already deteriorated past the point of pure reason. I'm still deciding. Well, while you're deciding, I have an idea. No, you don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to suggest something that would end with someone's car on fire. I was going to suggest something proportional and elegant. Pat, fine, but I want it on the record that I have options. What do you need? I thought about that. The love seat, the note about the memory foam, Krista filming herself making oatmeal in my kitchen with the confidence of a person who had already decided this space was hers. Brandon's face when I'd asked whose house this was, that brief, illuminating moment of avoidance that had told me more than anything he'd actually said. I need to understand what this actually is, because I don't think this is about a renovation. The table was quiet for a moment. Outside, rain had started, a light October rain that tapped at the kitchen windows the way it always had, the way it had when the kids were small and the house was full of noise. You think it's something more deliberate. I think Krista is very organized. Ruth picked up her wine glass, looked at it, put it down. You know what I noticed? The guest room setup. She didn't just put a dog bed in there. She set the whole room up. Curtains, humidifier, white noise machine. That takes time. That takes planning. I had noticed this too. That's not what someone does when they're improvising. That's what someone does when they've already decided where things are going. What does the will say? I looked at her. I'm asking because I'm your friend, and I was a bar owner for 20 years, and I learned to ask the questions nobody else wants to ask. What does the will say? The house and the primary assets go to Teresa. Silence. And Brandon knows this? Brandon knows this. More silence. The rain on the windows. When did you change it? 5 years ago, when Walter died. Teresa never asked for anything. In 30 years, Teresa never once asked me for anything she didn't earn. Brandon, I stopped, started again. Brandon has made assumptions about what would be there when the time came. I decided that the will should reflect what actually was rather than what was assumed. And Krista knows. It wasn't a question. Krista is organized. Yes, I think Krista knows. The cocoa vin sat abandoned on the stove. None of us touched it. Pat refilled everyone's glasses. Outside the window, Ruth's house sat dark and quiet across the street. And beyond it, the neighborhood did what neighborhoods in Connecticut do in October. It rained, gently on the leaf-strewn sidewalks, and looked exactly like a place where nothing unpleasant was happening. Whatever you decide, Norma, you know that. And if you decide you need someone who knows people who know people, I won't be needing that. I'm just saying the option exists. I slept on the love seat that night. My back had settled into a dull, grinding commentary that I had learned to tune out with the specific focus of a woman who had argued cases with migraines. I lay on the love seat in my study, under the quilt I had brought from the bedroom when I'd retrieved my reading glasses and my phone charger, and I looked at Walter's desk in the dark. The surface of it was just visible, the old green lamp, the small framed photo of us in Provincetown in 1989, the brass key on its hook that had come with the house and never been used. I had put it on the hook as a joke 34 years ago. Keys you never use end up looking decorative. They end up looking permanent. I thought about what Ruth had said. That's not what someone does when they're improvising. That's what someone does when they've already decided. I thought about the 3 months that were apparently required for a renovation that Brandon had called approximate. I thought about the arrangement of Krista's mornings, the filming, the kitchen, the controlled environment. I thought about the fact that she had set up Garbo's room before she had set up her own, which meant the room assignment had been decided before they arrived. I thought about my son's face when I'd asked whose house this was. I was a tax attorney for 38 years. I know what evidence looks like. I know the difference between a situation that developed accidentally and one that was constructed deliberately. And I know, with a certainty that does not require more data, when someone is trying to make you accustomed to less. I closed my eyes. Walter's desk was a dark shape in the dark room. The rain had stopped. The house was quiet in the way old houses are quiet, full of sound, but familiar sound, the specific language of a structure you have lived inside long enough to understand. I was still deciding, but I was getting close. The next 2 weeks proceeded with a surface normalcy that I found more instructive than any open conflict. Krista filmed in the kitchen every morning. She had introduced a second ring light and a small backdrop, a curved piece of white foam board that she positioned against the wall where I had always hung a calendar. The calendar was in a drawer. I did not ask about this. I was watching. Krista moved through the house with an increasing ease, small adjustments, each individually minor. A throw blanket on my living room sofa that wasn't mine. A different soap dispenser at the kitchen sink. A row of small succulents on the windowsill above the kitchen sink that blocked the view of the yard I had looked at for 34 years while doing dishes. Each thing alone was nothing. Together, they were a renovation of a different kind. Brandon went to work in Stamford every day and came home in the evenings to a version of the house that was incrementally not mine. I watched him navigate it. He was not, I think, fully conscious of the process. He saw his wife making a temporary space livable, which is a reasonable thing for a person to do. He did not see what I saw, which was the accumulation, the method. On a Saturday in late October, I came home from my walk to find that my study door was closed. I opened it. Garbo was inside, asleep on the love seat, and my reading chair, Walter's reading chair, the one from the corner, had been moved to make room for a second dog bed that had apparently been purchased and delivered without my awareness. A note on Walter's desk said, "Hope it's okay. She needed more space during the day. The chair is just pushed to the side. K." I stood in the doorway and looked at my study. at Walter's desk, Walter's books, Walter's chair pushed to the wall, at the dog asleep on my love seat, at the note in Krista's handwriting with its exclamation point and its assumption that this was the kind of thing one left a note about rather than asked. I picked up the note. I folded it. I put it in my pocket. Then I went across the street. Ruth was in her kitchen. She had coffee. She took one look at my face and poured me a cup without asking. She moved Walter's chair. Ruth set down the coffee pot. When? Today, while I was walking. Also, a second dog bed in my study. Norma. I know. What do you need? I need Louis McCord's home number. I know you have it. You two were on the County Bar Association board together. Ruth looked at me for a moment. Then she went to her desk drawer. Louis McCord had been my colleague at Sullivan & Park for 11 years before he went into private practice. He was 58, thorough, and had a particular gift for estate planning that came from a fundamental distrust of how families actually behave when money is involved. I had referred him clients for 20 years. He owed me several favors and would have said so himself. I called him that afternoon. He answered on the fourth ring, slightly out of breath, which meant he'd been in his garden. Norma Holloway, this is unexpected. Louis, I need to discuss my estate documents. All right. Can you come in Monday? Monday is fine. And Louis, I'll need it to be thorough, not an update, a review. I'll pull everything. 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock. I hung up. I was sitting at Walter's desk, in my study, with Garbo absent. She had apparently been let out at some point while I was at Ruth's, and the chair back in its corner, where I had returned it after finding it pushed aside. The room smelled the way it always smelled. Old paper, lemon furniture polish, the faint, dusty warmth of a room that has been loved for a long time. The brass key was on its hook by the door. I looked at it for a long time. Then I went to find Brandon. He was in the living room with his laptop, doing something work adjacent. Krista was upstairs. I could hear her on a call, the specific cadence of someone performing enthusiasm for a business purpose. The living room was quiet. The throw blanket that wasn't mine was on the arm of the couch. Garbo was asleep on the floor, because apparently the study and the guest room were not sufficient. I sat down in the chair across from Brandon and waited until he looked up. Hey, Mom. I want to talk about a timeline. Timeline for the renovation. It was supposed to be 3 months. We're at 3 weeks. I'd like to understand the schedule. Brandon closed his laptop halfway, the specific gesture of a man preparing to navigate something difficult. There have been some delays. What kind of delays? Permits, and the contractor found some. There was an issue with the wiring. It might be closer to 5 months now. I let that sit. 5 months. I know that's longer than we said, and I know it's an imposition, but the apartment is genuinely... Brandon, look at me. He looked at me. Is there an apartment being renovated? The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. In a deposition, 3 seconds is a geological age. What? I'm asking you a simple question. Is there a renovation happening in Stamford, or is there another reason you're here? Mom, of course there's a renovation. What are you... I'd like the contractor's name and number. I'd have to look it up. Look it up. He reached for his phone, spent a long time looking at it. I watched him perform the search with the attention I used to give witnesses who were trying to remember things that hadn't happened. His name's Tom Ferraro. But Mom, why are you... Thank you. I called Tom Ferraro from my study that evening. He was a real contractor. The renovation was real. The delay was real. Expanded scope, permit issues, structural something or other. He told me the expected completion was April, which was 6 months, not 3, and which he had apparently communicated to Brandon in September. So Brandon had known it was 6 months when he'd asked me. He'd said 3. That was one thing. I sat with that for a while. Then I thought about what else I didn't know, and I called Teresa. My daughter Teresa answered the phone at 9:30 Connecticut time, which was 9:30 Vermont time because Vermont is right there, with the slightly breathless quality of a woman who has just gotten 2 children to bed and is experiencing the fragile peace of a house that has temporarily ceased making demands of her. "Mom, hi, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me honestly." "Okay." "Has Brandon talked to you about me recently, about my living situation, my independence, any concerns he might have?" Long pause. "He called me in August." "Tell me." "He said he was worried about you being alone in that house. He said Krista had done some research about senior living options and they wanted to talk to me about—" She stopped. "Mom." "Go on." "He said they were thinking about," he used the phrase care arrangement. "He said the house was a lot for one person and that maybe it was time to think about transitioning. He wanted to know if I agreed." "What did you say?" "I said you were 71 years old and a former attorney who ran 6 miles a week and read the financial section before I was fully conscious in the morning, and that if he wanted to talk to me about your care arrangement, he should maybe wait until you were actually in need of one." "Thank you." "Mom, what's going on? Are they there with you now?" "They're staying with me while the apartment is renovated. It was supposed to be 3 months. It's apparently 6. "Mom, do you need me to come down?" "Not yet. I'm handling it." "You always are. But, Mom, call me if that changes." I hung up and sat for a moment in the dark of my study. Garbo was somewhere else in the house. Krista was laughing at something downstairs, a bright, performed laugh, the kind that goes in the content. Brandon's voice underneath it, lower, accommodating. In August, my son had called my daughter to discuss transitioning me out of my own home. In October, he had asked to stay with me for what he'd called 3 months, knowing it was 6. His wife had, within 3 weeks, established a working arrangement in my kitchen, moved my furniture, displaced me from my bedroom, and made herself at home in my study. This was not improvisation. This was a plan. I am a tax attorney. I know what a plan looks like, and I know that the appropriate response to a plan is a better one. I opened Walter's top desk drawer. In the back, under a stack of old legal pads, was my estate file, the summary documents, the trust information, the will. I had last reviewed it all 5 years ago, the month after Walter died, when I had rewritten everything in the clear-headed state of a woman who has just buried her husband and no longer has time for sentimentality about how things are supposed to go. The house went to Teresa, the primary investment trust, $340,000, accumulated over 4 decades of careful work and careful saving, had been designated 50-50 between Brandon and Teresa in the prior version. I had changed that too. In the new version, it went to Teresa, with a specific provision that Brandon receive $1 annually in acknowledgement that he was not overlooked. Lewis didn't know the details of this provision. He knew the documents, but he hadn't asked 5 years ago why the split had changed so dramatically. He had simply executed what I asked. Monday would be the time to review whether it still said what I intended and whether it was ironclad enough to do the job. I closed the file. The brass key caught the lamplight from where it hung on its hook, A small, plain, old-fashioned thing. The kind of key that came with a house and never quite had a use. I looked at it for a long time. Then I went to bed on the love seat, and I lay there with a specific, cold, lawyerly calm, and I thought through everything I was going to do. Monday's meeting with Lewis took 2 hours. His office was on the 6th floor of a building in downtown Bridgeport that had been built in the 1970s and had the specific, tired dignity of a place that had stopped trying to impress anyone but still showed up. He had coffee and a yellow legal pad, and the reading glasses he'd been threatening to replace for as long as I'd known him. После того, как я изложила ситуацию, сухо. So your son is staying with you under what you now believe is a partially fabricated emergency, with the intent to establish a pattern that could support an argument about your capacity for independent living. That's my reading. He's consulted a lawyer. I believe so. I don't have confirmation, but the approach has a structured quality. The will is what you left it. $1 annually to Brandon, remainder to Teresa. The language is solid. I drafted it to be clear, and it is. He looked at the pages over his glasses. You want to confirm it holds. I want to confirm that there is no legal challenge available to him on the grounds of capacity, and I want to ensure the timeline is clear. He could argue undue influence. He could argue incapacity. Both require evidence. Given your documented professional history and your current functioning, he paused. How's your functioning, Norma? I'm sleeping on a love seat, and I've already identified the full architecture of what's happening to me. Does that answer your question? It does. I'll also note that the most recent version of the will is dated 5 years ago, long before this situation developed, which makes any claim of situational manipulation essentially impossible to argue. He set down the legal pad. What do you want to do? I want to change nothing. I want the will to remain exactly as it is, and I want Brandon to know what it says. Lewis looked at me over his glasses. You want him to know. At the right time, and through the right channel. Teresa. Teresa. She already knows the general shape of it. When the time comes, I'll tell her the specifics. She'll tell Brandon, he'll come to me, and then we'll have the conversation we've apparently been building toward. That's a patient approach. I've been patient my entire career. It's a useful quality. He walked me out. In the elevator, he said, "The dog has its own room." The dog has the guest room. The dog's belongings are also in my study. The things that happen in Connecticut. I drove home. It was a gray November day. The trees were stripped. The yards had the specific, bare honesty of late autumn, everything exposed and without apology. I stopped at the grocery store. I bought what I needed for the week. I did not buy anything Krista had asked for, because she had asked me to pick up several items if I was going anyway, which I was, but which was not the same as agreeing to do her shopping. When I got home, there was a cat in the backyard. He was sitting under the bare hydrangea bush near the back fence, a large orange tabby with the settled expression of someone who has made a decision and intends to stand by it. I did not know this cat. I had not seen this cat before. I opened the back door, and he walked in with the confidence of a resident. Garbo, who had been asleep on my living room floor, woke up, saw the cat, made a sound I can only describe as a small, strangled, existential crisis, and retreated at speed to the hallway. The cat watched this with the complete serenity of a being who has seen panic before and found it uninteresting. Then he sat down in the middle of my kitchen and looked at me. I looked at him. He looked at me. I fed him the rest of the rotisserie chicken from lunch. The cat's name is Witness. I didn't name him that. I did. He's mine. Was mine, technically. I found him 3 weeks ago.
I thought he needed more space. A pause. I thought you might find him useful. Ruth. What? He's a cat. He goes where he wants to go. He terrifies Garbo. He does, a little bit. Is that a problem? I considered. Witness was at this moment sitting on Walter's desk, regarding the room with proprietorial satisfaction. He had, in the previous 2 hours, also sat on Krista's ring light and knocked over one of the succulents from the kitchen windowsill. The suitably framed hydrangea view was restored. I had put the succulent on the counter and said nothing. No, it's not a problem. Witness stayed. He slept on Walter's reading chair with an authority that no one argued with, including Garbo. He appeared on Krista's filming background twice in the next week, once sitting on the foam board backdrop with his tail wrapped neatly around his feet, looking directly into the camera, and once perching on the kitchen counter just behind Krista's left shoulder during what she later described as a really good take. He had, without apparent effort, become a fixture. When Krista asked whose cat he was, I said, I don't know how he got here, which was technically true in the sense that I had not personally invited him, and which I repeated on subsequent occasions with the same mild delivery. Brandon, to his credit, was allergic to cats, in a minor, manageable way that manifested primarily as a tendency to sneeze at inopportune moments. During Krista's filming on Wednesday morning, Brandon sneezed 7 times in a row. Krista had to stop and restart. Maybe Witness should stay outside when I'm filming. He goes where he wants to go. This was a direct quote from Ruth, and it gave me a small, private satisfaction. The Tuesday Club that week was soup, French onion, which was Diane's suggestion, and which was, unusually, an unqualified success. We ate it properly, with the bread and the cheese melted over the top, and we opened wine that was better than what we usually opened, because Pat had brought something from a case she'd been saving. Тихо, когда Brandon и Krista вышли из дома. How was the meeting with Louis? Productive, everything is in order. And, come on, give us something. When the time comes, Teresa will learn what the will contains. Teresa will, in the natural course of things, mention it to Brandon. Brandon will come to me. At that point, I'll explain my reasoning. You're going to let him find out through his sister. I'm going to let it occur naturally. Norma, naturally. She put air quotes around the word. Naturally. And the timing. What's the timing? I thought I might mention the specifics to Teresa around Christmas. Family gatherings are a natural time for conversations about future planning. The 3 of them looked at each other. Something passed between them, not spoken, but understood. And meanwhile, nothing changes. You're just going to let them be here. They have a legitimate need. The renovation is real. I said they could stay. I keep my word. I looked at my soup. I'm also watching, and I am very patient. Jesus, Norma. Pat. No, I mean, genuinely, Jesus, Norma. November progressed. Witness established a routine that had the self-satisfied regularity of a creature who has found exactly the situation that suits him. He slept on Walter's chair, patrolled the yard in the mornings, and appeared in the kitchen at mealtimes with the polite but unwavering expectation of someone who has never had to ask twice. Garbo reached an accommodation with him, a mutual avoidance that functioned adequately, with Garbo occasionally attempting a tentative approach and Witness declining to acknowledge it. On one occasion, Krista filmed a segment she called Our Dogs Making Friends,
that featured approximately 12 seconds of Garbo approaching Witness and Witness turning his back. She posted it anyway. Several thousand people found it charming. Brandon had stopped arguing about sleeping arrangements. My bedroom was mine. This had happened not through any further explicit negotiation, but through the gradual reassertion of fact. I had simply moved back. The same day I'd spoken with Teresa, with the quiet decision of a person returning to their own space. And Krista had read my face correctly enough not to raise it again. The guest room remained Garbo's domain. I slept in my bed. My back recovered its equilibrium. What didn't recover was the kitchen. Krista had added to her setup in increments: a second backdrop, a portable stovetop for filmed cooking demonstrations, a collection of photogenic kitchen equipment that was arranged along the counter and which I was apparently not to move because it's set up for continuity. I had one morning moved a copper saucepan that was sitting directly in front of the coffee maker because I wanted to make coffee. And Krista had come downstairs 12 minutes later and spent several minutes relocating it with the expression of someone correcting a significant error. I watched this and said nothing. I was waiting for Christmas. In the first week of December, I called Teresa and told her about the will. All of it. The $1 provision, the trust, the complete structure. I explained my reasoning. Teresa listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. The $1 a year. Specifically noted as intentional. Lewis's language is clear. Mom, do you want me to tell it? Not yet. I'll tell you when. Okay. Another pause. Mom, are you all right with them there? I'm fine. I know what's happening, and I know what I'm doing. That's a comfortable position. Dad always said you were the most dangerous person in any room when you were quiet. I didn't answer that for a moment. Outside the window, the first real snow of the season had started. Light, tentative, the kind that melts immediately but carries the intention of more. He wasn't wrong. Christmas was at my house because Christmas had always been at my house, and I had not offered to change this. Teresa drove down from Vermont with Greg and the kids. Lily, who was 12 and reading constantly, and Sam, who was 9 and building elaborate structures out of whatever materials he could find. They arrived on the 23rd. The house filled with the specific noise of children who are comfortable somewhere. The particular freedom of kids in a grandparent's house where the rules are relaxed in ways that feel like a gift. Brandon and Krista were present and performing well. Krista had dressed the house, additional decorations, a wreath on the door that was undeniably nice, candles in the windows. She had filmed a Christmas at my in-laws' home content series with a warm, inclusive energy that made the whole thing look inviting. She was charming with the kids. She was generous with Teresa. She was, I observed, on her very best behavior. Teresa and I had one conversation alone in the kitchen on the morning of Christmas Eve while the house was still waking up and the coffee was making its first pot. Now? Whenever it feels natural. Mom, nothing about this feels natural. Then wait for a natural moment and speak naturally. You'll know. The natural moment came Christmas afternoon, during the lull after presents and before dinner, when the adults were in the living room with their second glasses of wine and the kids were doing something complicated upstairs. Greg had wandered off to look at something in the study. He appreciated Walter's desk, had admired it on previous visits, and it was just the four of us, Brandon, Krista, Teresa, me. Krista was telling a story about Garbo and the Christmas tree, something cute, Garbo-related, And Brandon was laughing, and Teresa was listening with the expression of someone attending to something else in her peripheral vision. Krista закончила. В паузе между темами очень спокойно. Brandon, Mom told me she'd updated her estate planning. Brandon looked at her. The laugh was still on his face from the Garbo story. It faded. Yeah? Yeah. She walked me through the whole thing earlier this year. The house, the trust, all of it. A pause. I thought you should know. Krista had stopped moving. She was sitting with her wine glass at precisely the angle it had been at a moment before. She didn't look at me. She looked at Teresa. What specifically did she share with you? Everything. The full trust distribution. The provisions for each of us. She looked at him with the clear, direct gaze of a woman who has been teaching high school for 15 years and cannot be fooled about the meaning of silences. You should ask Mom about it if you want details. Brandon looked at me. I was sitting in Walter's chair with my wine, watching the fire. I looked back at him. Whenever you're ready. He was not ready Christmas Day. He was not ready the day after, though I could see him moving toward it. A new quality of attention, a stillness in his presence. The way a man looks when he's heard something he can't unhear and is trying to determine its dimensions. Krista was quieter than she had been. The warm energy of her performance had gone slightly internal, recalculating, I thought, working out the geometry. Teresa and her family left the 28th. The hugs at the door were real and long, the way goodbyes are when you mean them. Teresa ticha, when we were alone for a second. Call me. Rovna. I will. Teresa, tighter hug. I love you, Mom. Rovna, meaning it. I love you too. The car disappeared down Aldermore Lane. I went inside. Brandon was standing in the living room, and Krista had gone upstairs, and the house had the particular silence of a place where something is about to be said. Mom, can we talk? Rovna, of course. We sat at the kitchen table. Witness appeared from somewhere and installed himself on the counter, which he had decided was his right. Brandon looked at him and sneezed. Then he looked at me. Brandon, Susilium sabravsibe. Teresa said you updated the will. Rovna. I updated it 5 years ago, in November, after your father died. Brandon, осторожно. She said you walked her through the whole thing. Rovna. I did. This year. Brandon, напряженно. Why didn't you tell me? I waited one moment, the careful, professional pause of a woman who has learned what silence can do in a negotiation. Rovna. Because it's my will, Brandon. It's not a committee decision. Brandon. Дыхание стало другим. Mom, what does it say? About the house and... Rovna. The house goes to Teresa. The trust goes to Teresa. You receive a symbolic acknowledgement. The silence that followed was not the gentle silence of a November night, or the comfortable silence of a room that knows you. It was the specific, dense silence of a fact landing. A symbolic? What does that mean? $1 annually. Lewis's language is clear that it is intentional. Brandon's face went through several things. Disbelief was first. Then a rapid calculation. I could almost see it, working backward through the timeline. When had the will been changed? 5 years ago. Before the renovation plan. Before August. Before any of this. He couldn't argue it was reactive. It had preceded everything. Mom, I don't understand. Why? Why Teresa and not... Because Teresa has never once, in her adult life, asked me for anything she didn't earn. Because Teresa didn't call her sibling in August to discuss transitioning me out of my home. I watched his face. Yes, I know about that.
Mom, because when I asked you to come in here and move your things back to the guest room 3 weeks after you arrived, you nodded and did nothing. And the next morning, your wife had put a second dog bed in my study next to your father's chair. Because the contractor told you in September that the renovation was 6 months, and you told me 3. He was very still. I have been practicing law for 38 years. I know what evidence looks like. I know the difference between a situation that developed and a plan that was executed. A pause. I am not confused. I am not fragile. I am not in need of a care arrangement. Another pause, shorter. I am, however, finished pretending that I didn't see what I saw. We were worried about you, genuinely. The house is big and you're alone, and I like being alone. I liked it when you called on Sundays. I did not like having my study reorganized while I was on a walk. I didn't know she did that. I looked at him. I believed him.
That was the complicated thing about Brandon. He was not a malicious person. He was a person who had elected for years not to look too carefully at the things his wife was doing, because looking meant responding, and responding meant friction. He had chosen comfort over clarity, and the cost of that choice was that he genuinely didn't know some of what had been done in his name. Ровно, немного тише. I know you didn't. That's part of the problem. He looked at the table. His hands were flat on it, the way they'd been when he was small and in trouble. Not a posture of argument, but of exposure, of a child who has run out of story. Brandon, очень тихо. Can I do anything? Is the will ровно? It's my will. It reflects my considered judgment. It was written 5 years ago, and I confirm it now. I paused. What you can do is what you should have done 3 weeks into this renovation. Tell your wife that this kitchen and this study are mine, that Garbo's room is the guest room, and no other room in this house is available for reallocation. And call the contractor and get me an actual completion date so I know when my house will be my own again. Brandon was quiet for a long time. Brandon, наконец, очень тихо. I'm sorry, Mom. I looked at my son, 46 years old, tired, sitting at the same table where he'd done his homework and told me about his first girlfriend, and sat in silence with me the morning after his father died. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had made specific choices, and the choices had consequences, and the consequences were now sitting at the kitchen table with him. Ровно. I know. I'll talk to Krista. Ровно. You should. He got up. Witness watched him go with the serene disinterest of a creature who has not been personally involved, but has followed the situation with mild attention. I sat at the table alone for a moment with my coffee. Cold now. I'd been holding it throughout without drinking. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Aldermore Lane was empty and gray, with the specific winter stillness of a Tuesday morning in Connecticut after Christmas, when all the visitors have left. I heated the coffee. I sat back down. I drank it. The conversation with Krista I did not witness directly, because it happened upstairs, in what was technically my bedroom, but which I had returned to after that first conversation with Brandon, and which felt mine again in the way a space feels like yours when you reclaim it. I heard voices, Krista's, quick and pressured, Brandon's, lower and with a firmness he didn't always manage. It went on for 40 minutes. I read. Witness joined me on the reading chair, which was back in its corner, and settled in with the professionalism of an experienced lap cat. Krista came downstairs at 11. I was in the kitchen by then making lunch. She stood in the doorway, and for a moment I saw her without the performance, without the warm smile and the effortless ease. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been executing a strategy for several months and had just learned that the foundation under it was not what she'd thought. Jorma, Krista, I owe you an apology. I turned around. She was standing with her arms at her sides, not crossed, not protective, but uncertain. Uncertain was not a register I had seen from her. All right. I made decisions about your space without asking. That was wrong. A pause. The bedroom, the study, the kitchen. Another pause. The chair. The chair. Walter's chair. Yes. I'm sorry. I looked at her for a moment. She was 38 years old and smart and had been for several months working a plan with patient consistency. She had also, I now thought, started it with a kind of logic that was not entirely dishonest. Brandon had genuinely believed I might benefit from less house. Krista had taken that concern and built an architecture around it that served her own interests, and that was the thing that couldn't be undone with an apology. But the apology itself seemed real. I accept it, Krista nodded. She looked at her hands. Then, the will. Brandon told me. I know. It's just money. I let that sit for one beat. It's just money. And your guest room is just a room. It's interesting how those two things sound different when they apply to you. She looked at me. Something went through her face. Recognition, maybe, or something closer to respect, which is not what I'd expected. That's fair. I turned back to my lunch preparations. The kitchen returns to its original arrangement by tomorrow. The study is my space. The succulents can stay if you'd like. They've been there 3 months, and I've become accustomed to them. I paused. Witness stays. The cat. The cat. A pause. Okay. She left. I heard her on the stairs and then in the guest room, Garbo's room, which remained Garbo's room because Garbo was not at fault in any of this, and I had no quarrel with the dog. The succulents I kept because they were genuinely nice. The hydrangea view was still partially obscured, but less so, and in spring the hydrangea would come back anyway. The renovation completed in late March. The contractor sent Brandon a text message on a Thursday, and Brandon told me that evening at dinner with the specific quality of relief I had seen him carry for weeks. They're done. We can move back in weekend after next. Good. I'll need a week to air the house out. Fair enough. The ring lights came down, the backdrops came down, the copper saucepan returned to my cabinet. The kitchen returned to itself, imperfect, familiar, mine, with the calendar back on its wall and the morning view across the yard restored. Brandon and Krista stripped the guest room of Garbo's setup and left it as it had been, a guest room, with a full bed and 2 lamps and the old quilt I'd put there 20 years ago. Garbo had a new bed in their car. She seemed fine. Dogs adapt. Brandon hugged me at the door. It was a real hug, longer than it needed to be, the kind people give when they're apologizing for something they haven't said aloud. I'm sorry, Mom, for the whole thing. I know. He pulled back. His eyes were the same eyes he'd had at 3 years old, watching Walter build the back porch, wide and earnest and a little sorry for things he'd done. I have never been able to fully harden against those eyes. Call on Sundays. I will. Krista shook my hand, an actual handshake, firm and direct, the way professionals do it. She looked me in the eye. Thank you for the hospitality. You're welcome. She got in the car. Garbo was in the back seat in her travel harness, looking out the window. The Prius backed out of the driveway, and I stood on the porch and watched it go down Aldermore Lane and turn at the corner and disappear. I went inside. The house was very quiet. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and did nothing. Just stood there, listening to the particular silence of a house that has recently been full of other people and is now empty. It was not an unpleasant silence. It was the silence of a house returning to itself. Witness came in from wherever he'd been and sat on the floor in the middle of the kitchen, looking up at me. "Well," I said. He said nothing. He was a cat. The Tuesday Club that week featured an ambitious attempt at homemade pasta. Diane had bought a pasta machine and was committed to the project, and it went better than most things went in our kitchen, which is to say, it was chaotic and took 3 hours and produced an excellent result. We ate at 10 o'clock at night with the third bottle open and the pasta maker disassembled on the counter, and Pat was telling a story about something that had happened at her nephew's bar in Waterbury that had nothing to do with anything and was very funny. Ruth, when there was a natural pause, quietly, "So, how does it feel?" Quiet. Good quiet or bad quiet? Good quiet. Very good quiet. And the will stands. The will stands. Brandon called last Sunday. We talked for 20 minutes. He asked about the pasta attempt. Teresa had apparently told him. He did not mention the will. He accepted it. He accepted it. Something settled in the room, not dramatic, not triumphant, but the specific, quiet satisfaction of a thing concluded. I want to say something. God help us. I've known you for 11 years, and I have never once seen you scared. Not of anything. Not even, she paused, not even when Walter was sick. And I watched you go through this thing with these people in your house, this very organized, patient, deliberate thing, and I thought, if I were them, I would have been absolutely terrified. You should also have been terrified. I know, I am, a little. She raised her glass. To Norma Holloway. To Norma. I raised mine. Outside, April had arrived in the specific, tentative way of Connecticut's springs. A warmth that wasn't quite committed yet, the grass newly green, the yard preparing to become what it had been every year I'd lived here. In a few weeks, the hydrangea would come back. In June, the back porch would need repainting, and I would hire someone to do it, and they would do it the way they always did, and the house would be as it had always been. I drank. The wine was good. The pasta had been excellent. Witness was asleep on the reading chair in the next room, visible through the doorway in the warm light of Walter's lamp. Teresa had called that morning, early, just to check in. "How are you, Mom?" "I'm good, Teresa. How are the kids?" "Lily's reading War and Peace. She's 12. "Of course she is." "Brandon called me last week." "I know. He told me." He was okay, Mom. He wasn't angry. He was kind of quiet about it." "Brandon is a good person who made some bad choices. Those aren't the same thing." "I know. I think he knows." A beat. "Mom, do you feel okay about all of it?" I had been standing in my kitchen in the early morning, coffee in hand, facing east the way I always did, watching the yard come slowly light, the hydrangea, the back porch Walter had built the summer Brandon was 3, the specific, ordinary, precious quiet of a Tuesday morning before anything else begins. Yes. Good. And then, "I love you." "I love you too." I hung up. I stood for a moment longer at the window. The brass key was on the hook inside the study door where it had always been, where it had been for 34 years, through Walter's death and the kids growing and all the ordinary accumulation of a life lived in one place. I had never used it. I had never needed to. I went into the study and took the key off the hook. It was small and heavy and cold in my hand. Solid, the way old things are solid. I looked at it for a moment, then I put it back. I did not need to lock my door. I was in my house. My house was mine. I went to make a second cup of coffee, and I watched the morning light move across my yard, and I was, precisely, exactly, without qualification, content.